She was 6 years old, clutching a plastic doll with one missing eye, whispering, "Please don't see me," as she squeezed herself into the oil-stained darkness beneath a Mafia boss's SUV. Seconds later, her stepfather's voice shattered the evening silence.
Anna! Anna!
Raw with drunken fury, roaring her name like a curse as he rounded the corner into the underground garage. And when his bloodshot eyes found the immaculate black vehicle armor-plated, chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights, the air itself seemed to freeze. Because no one approached Alfonso Falcone's property and walked away without his permission. Alfonso Falcone didn't need to look up when danger arrived. He already knew. After 15 years building the most feared organization in the city, surviving 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal grand juries, and a war that left half the old families in ruins, he'd learned to sense threats the way sharks sense blood in water. By instinct, by the shift in atmosphere before the storm breaks. He'd just stepped out of his penthouse elevator, his driver, Marco, waiting by the SUV with the rear door open, when he heard it. The frantic scrape of small feet on concrete. Too fast, too desperate, too young to be anything but pure terror in motion. This wasn't a vagrant looking for shelter. This wasn't some street kid hoping to steal hubcaps. This was someone running from death itself. Then he saw her. A small figure burst from behind the support column, dark hair, wild and matted, oversized jacket torn at the sleeve, face streaked with tears and grime. The child couldn't have been older than 6, maybe 7. She scanned the dimly lit garage with the frantic, darting eyes of a hunted animal. And then, those eyes found him. She didn't hesitate, didn't question. Some primal instinct made the choice for her. She dove beneath his SUV, her tiny body folding into the narrow space between the massive tires and the undercarriage, disappearing into the mechanical shadow like a ghost seeking sanctuary. Across the garage, Marco's hand drifted to his shoulder holster. Behind Alfonso, the elevator doors opened again. Enzo and Matteo, his personal security, emerging with faces carved from granite. All 3 men went rigid, their casual professionalism evaporating into razor-sharp alertness. Alfonso felt a trembling hand brush against his polished leather shoe, ice cold, slick with rain or sweat, or both. A voice rose from beneath the vehicle, small and shattered. "Please don't let him find me." Alfonso slowly crouched down, his tailored suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. In the darkness beneath the chassis, he saw her eyes wide and blue, drowning in fear. One small fist pressed against her mouth to stifle her sobs, the other clutching that battered doll like it was the only thing tethering her to sanity. "Easy," he murmured, his voice gravel and smoke, loud enough for his men but soft enough to anchor her. "No one touches what's under my vehicle." That's when the footsteps echoed through the garage. Heavy, uneven, rage-given rhythm. A man stumbled into view from the stairwell entrance, broad-shouldered, wild-eyed, shirt untucked and stained, face flushed crimson with alcohol and fury. Thomas Allen moved like a wounded bull, all blind aggression and no strategy, his boots striking the concrete with violent purpose. His eyes swept the space past the luxury sedans, past the concrete pillars, past the security cameras he was too drunk or too stupid to notice, until they locked onto the scene before him. Alfonso Falcone, standing beside his SUV, 3 armed men flanking him like extensions of his will. Thomas froze for half a second. Recognition flickered through the alcohol fog. Everyone in this city knew the name Falcone. Everyone knew what it meant. But desperation is stronger than wisdom. "That's my stepdaughter," Thomas growled, his voice thick with barely restrained violence, one hand gesturing vaguely toward the SUV.
"She has something that belongs to me. There's nothing here. You're trespassing. Leave!"
"She ran off with something that belongs to me. Hand her over." The garage went silent. Marco and the others didn't move, didn't speak, but the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Their stillness was more threatening than any weapon. Alfonso straightened to his full height, his expression carved from stone, his dark eyes holding Thomas with the weight of someone who'd ordered men's executions before breakfast. "I don't see anyone," Alfonso said, his voice cold and absolute. "Just you. Trespassing." Thomas's jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. But before he could take another step, before he could spit another word, Enzo shifted his stance, subtle, deliberate, and the unmistakable outline of the gun beneath his jacket became visible. Thomas's eyes flicked to Enzo, to Matteo, to Marco, back to Alfonso. For 5 heartbeats, violence hung in the air like electricity before lightning. Then Thomas exhaled through his nose, slow, venomous, his whole body trembling with impotent rage. "She has something of mine," he hissed. "When I find her—" "You won't." Alfonso interrupted, his tone quiet but absolute as a judge's gavel. Not tonight. Not ever. He took one measured step forward, his shadow stretching across the concrete toward Thomas like a dark promise. I suggest you walk away now, Alfonso continued, each word precisely placed, or crawl later. Thomas stood there, trembling, memorizing Alfonso's face like he was etching it onto a future gravestone, his lips pulled back in something between a snarl and a bitter grin. Then he spat on the garage floor, turned on his heel, and staggered back toward the stairwell, his footsteps echoing away until the heavy door slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed felt like the held breath before an avalanche. Alfonso remained standing for 3 long seconds, ensuring Thomas was truly gone. Then he crouched again beside the SUV, peering into the darkness beneath. You can come out now, he said softly. The small figure didn't move at first. Then, slowly, Anna Brown crawled forward into the light, her clothes torn, her knees scraped and bleeding, her face a mask of exhausted terror. She still clutched the plastic doll in one hand, and in the other, Alfonso noticed, was something else. A small flash drive, no bigger than his thumb, clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. What's your name? Alfonso asked, his voice gentler than his men had heard in years. Anna, she whispered. Anna, he repeated, extending one hand. I'm Alfonso, and you're safe now. She looked at his hand, then at his face. Then, with the cautious trust of someone who'd learned too young that adults lie, she placed her tiny, trembling hand in his. Marco opened the SUV's rear door without being asked. As Alfonso helped Anna to her feet, his mind was already working through the implications. The flash drive, Thomas's desperation, the words, something that belongs to me. This wasn't just a stepfather looking for a runaway child. This was something much bigger. And Alfonso Falcone, whether he knew it yet or not, had just declared war. The compound security gate closed behind them with the finality of a vault door sealing. Anna sat in the back seat, small and silent, her eyes tracking every shadow that passed beneath the streetlights as Marco navigated the winding private drive. The estate rose before them like a fortress dressed in marble and iron, its windows glowing warm against the night, deceptively inviting. Alfonso hadn't spoken since they left the garage. He was calculating, measuring, planning. The child was a variable he hadn't anticipated, but variables could be managed. What concerned him was the flash drive still clutched in her fist, and the desperation in Thomas Allen's eyes. Men like Thomas didn't chase children through the city over stolen toys. Inside, Alfonso led Anna to his private study, a room of dark mahogany and leather, where he'd orchestrated everything from legitimate real estate acquisitions to executions. Marco stationed himself outside the door. Enzo disappeared to sweep the perimeter. Anna stood in the center of the Persian rug, looking impossibly small beneath the vaulted ceiling, her torn jacket hanging off one shoulder. The drive, Alfonso said gently, lowering himself into the chair across from her rather than behind his imposing desk. Why did you take it? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I heard him talking on the phone. He said if anyone found it, he'd go to prison forever. He said I was insurance. Her fingers tightened around the plastic. I thought if I took it, he couldn't hurt me anymore. Alfonso felt something cold settle in his chest. Insurance. The word alone told him enough. May I see it? Anna hesitated, then placed the drive in his outstretched palm. It was warm from her grip, smaller than a lighter, and worth judging by Thomas's reaction more than most men earned in a lifetime. Alfonso pressed the intercom. Get Carmine up here. Now. Carmine Russo arrived within minutes, a wiry man in his 50s with thick glasses and the nervous energy of someone who lived in data streams rather than the physical world. He was the best forensic accountant the family had ever employed, a man who could trace money through 100 shell corporations and 6 countries before most people finished their morning coffee. Alfonso handed him the drive without preamble. Everything on this, quietly. Carmine plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of keys and Anna's shallow breathing. Then Carmine went very still. Boss, he said slowly, his voice tight with something close to fear. You need to see this. Alfonso moved behind the desk, reading over Carmine's shoulder. Spreadsheets cascaded down the screen, columns of transactions, account numbers, dates, amounts, millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts, real estate holdings, construction contracts, and names, so many names. District Attorney Marcus Thorne, Police Commissioner Gerald Strand, 3 city council members, 2 federal judges, a web of corruption so vast and so carefully documented that Alfonso understood immediately why Thomas had been desperate enough to confront him in that garage. "This is money laundering," Carmine whispered. "But it's coordinated, organized. Look at this." He pulled up another file, a letterhead bearing an embossed rose, thorns curling elegantly around the petals. "They call themselves the Syndicate of the Rose." Alfonso leaned closer, his jaw tightening as he read the financial reports. Extortion, blackmail, protection money from businesses that thought they were paying legitimate security firms, political contributions that were anything but voluntary. The syndicate controlled the city from the inside, wearing the mask of respectability while bleeding it dry. And Thomas Allen was listed as an associate courier, expendable, disposable. Alfonso straightened, his mind already shifting from calculation to strategy. This wasn't just about protecting a child anymore. This was about power, control, and something far more dangerous than he'd anticipated, a criminal network that had infiltrated the very institutions meant to oppose them. He looked at Anna, still standing on the rug, exhausted and terrified, and then at the screen displaying the Syndicate of the Rose's carefully constructed empire. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp and absolute. "Carmine, make copies, triple redundancy. Then wipe the original and restore it exactly as it was found." Alfonso's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd just chosen his battlefield. "Marco, move Anna to the upstate villa. Full security detail. No one in or out without my direct authorization." He turned to face the window overlooking his estate, his reflection ghosted against the darkness beyond. "They want their ledger back," he said quietly. "They'll have to go through me first." Behind him, Carmine's fingers flew across the keyboard. Anna finally sat down in the oversized chair, her small body disappearing into the leather. And Alfonso Falcone, who had spent 15 years avoiding wars he didn't need to fight, made the choice that would define everything that followed. "The child stays with the family," he declared. "We handle this ourselves." The upstate villa sat 3 hours north of the city, hidden behind iron gates and ancient oaks that had witnessed a century of secrets. It was the kind of place Alfonso kept for emergencies, isolated, defensible, stocked with supplies that could sustain a small army for months. The main house sprawled across manicured grounds, all stone and reinforced glass, beautiful in the way fortresses are beautiful when money softens their edges. Anna had fallen asleep in the car, her head resting against the window, the plastic doll still tucked under her arm. Marco carried her inside without waking her, disappearing down the east wing where a bedroom had been prepared. 4 guards patrolled the perimeter. 2 more monitored the security feeds from the gatehouse. Alfonso had learned long ago that safety was measured in layers, and he'd wrapped this place in enough of them to stop anything short of a military assault. He stood on the terrace overlooking the grounds, the early morning mist clinging to the tree line, when he heard the footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Silvio Contini moved with the deliberate weight of a man who'd been Alfonso's right hand for 12 years, his capo, his strategist, his counsel in matters too delicate for anyone else. "You called me away from the East Side negotiations for this?" Silvio's voice carried an edge Alfonso had rarely heard, sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. "For this," Alfonso confirmed, still watching the mist. "Yes." Silvio stepped beside him, his expensive suit pristine despite the 3-hour drive, his silver-threaded hair swept back with military precision. He was older than Alfonso by 15 years, a survivor of the old wars, a man who understood that survival meant knowing when to fight and when to cut losses. "The girl," Silvio said flatly. "You're protecting the girl. I'm protecting what's right." Silvio's laugh was cold, hollow. "Since when do we deal in right and wrong, Alfonso?" "We deal in power, in leverage, in staying alive long enough to enjoy our empires." He turned, his eyes hard as flint. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Thomas Allen is connected to District Attorney Thorne. Thorne controls half the judges in the city, the Syndicate of the Rose. I've seen the ledger." "Then you understand," Silvio pressed, his urgency bleeding through his controlled exterior. "You understand this isn't a fight we can win. They're not street thugs. They're the system itself. They'll bury us in indictments, freeze our assets, turn our own soldiers against us with immunity deals." Alfonso finally turned to face him, his expression carved from stone. "And if we hand her over? If we give them back their ledger and pretend we never saw it?" "We survive," Silvio said simply. "We preserve what we've built. We live to fight battles we can actually win, while they continue bleeding this city dry. While men like Thorne sit in their offices collecting bribes and calling it justice." Alfonso's voice remained quiet, but something dangerous had entered it. "While children like Anna become collateral damage?" Silvio's jaw tightened. "One child, Alfonso, One child against everything we've built, against the lives of every man loyal to this family. Is that really the trade you want to make? It's not a trade. It's a line in the sand. It's suicide, Silvio snapped, his composure cracking. You're choosing sentiment over strategy. The old Alfonso would never. The old Alfonso. Alfonso interrupted, his voice dropping to something colder than Silvio had ever heard. Didn't know the depth of their corruption, didn't see how far it reached. But I've seen it now, Silvio. And I'm not stepping aside. Silvio stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Calculation, perhaps, or frustration, or something deeper Alfonso couldn't quite name. The urgency that had brought him here seemed to pulse beneath his skin, insistent, wrong. They'll come for her, Silvio said finally. For you, for all of us. Then let them come. Silvio's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white against the fabric of his suit. For just a second, Alfonso saw something in his capo's eyes that didn't belong there. Fear, yes, but also guilt, the kind that came from knowing too much, or saying too little. I hope you know what you're doing, Silvio said quietly. He turned and walked back into the villa, his footsteps echoing across the terrace stones. Alfonso remained standing in the morning light, watching the mist burn away, and wondered why his most trusted advisor had seemed so desperate to convince him to surrender. The thought settled in his chest like ice. Trust, he reminded himself, was just another word for a weakness you hadn't discovered yet. The East River Bridge stretched across the water like a steel spine, connecting the city to the industrial wasteland beyond. It was the fastest route to the secondary safe house Alfonso had arranged, a nondescript apartment building where Anna could disappear into anonymity while he dealt with the syndicate. Traffic was light at this hour, just after dawn, the bridge still caught between night shift workers heading home and morning commuters not yet awake. Alfonso sat in the back seat of the armored sedan, Anna beside him wrapped in a blanket too large for her small frame, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Marco drove with the steady competence of someone who'd navigated worse roads under worse circumstances. Enzo rode shotgun, his hand resting casually near his weapon, his eyes scanning every vehicle that passed. Behind them, a second sedan followed at a precise distance, carrying two more guards whose names Alfonso knew, but whose faces had become interchangeable over the years. Protection was a machine, efficient and impersonal, until the moment it failed. They were halfway across the bridge when Alfonso noticed the white van 3 cars ahead slow down. Marco, he said quietly. I see it, boss. The van's brake lights flared. It stopped completely, blocking the right lane. Behind them, a delivery truck pulled across the left lane, boxing them in with the practiced coordination of men who'd rehearsed this maneuver until it became muscle memory. Alfonso's hand shot out, pulling Anna down against the seat. Stay down. The white van's rear doors exploded open. 4 men emerged, assault rifles already raised, their faces hidden behind black masks. They moved with military precision, fanning out across the bridge deck, weapons trained on the sedan. Marco slammed the car into reverse, tires screaming against asphalt, the windshield spiderwebbed as bullets hammered into the reinforced glass, the sound like hail on tin roofing, violent and relentless. Get us out of... Enzo's voice cut off as the delivery truck behind them lurched forward, slamming into their rear bumper with enough force to throw Alfonso against the seat back. Anna screamed, a sound that tore through Alfonso's chest worse than any bullet could. The sedan behind them tried to maneuver around the collision. That's when Alfonso saw it, the small black device attached to their escort vehicle's undercarriage, red light blinking in rhythm with his own racing heartbeat. Marco, tell them to... The explosion tore through the morning like the world ending. The escort sedan erupted in a fireball of twisted metal and shattered glass, the blast wave slamming into their vehicle hard enough to lift the rear wheels off the pavement. The armored sedan fishtailed wildly, Marco fighting the wheel as smoke and debris rained across the bridge. Alfonso threw himself over Anna, his body becoming a shield as the windshield finally gave way, safety glass cascading inward in 1,000 glittering fragments. Something hot and sharp tore across his shoulder blade shrapnel. His mind registered distantly, even as pain exploded through his back. Heat washed over them. The acrid stench of burning rubber and something worse filled the car. Marco's hands were still on the wheel, but his head had slumped forward, blood spreading across the dashboard in a pattern too geometric to be anything but fatal. Enzo was screaming into the radio, calling for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. His window shot out, his jacket torn and smoking. The masked men advanced through the smoke, their rifles raised, moving with the confidence of soldiers who'd already won. Alfonso's hand found the Beretta holstered against his ribs. His shoulder screamed in protest as he raised the weapon, but pain was negotiable. Death wasn't. "Stay down," he hissed to Anna, who was sobbing beneath him, her small body shaking so violently he could feel it through his own bones. 3 shots. 3 men dropped. The 4th dove behind the delivery truck. Sirens wailed in the distance, too far away to matter, but close enough to change the equation. The remaining attacker fired blind around the truck's edge, bullets punching through the sedan's door, missing Alfonso by inches. Enzo kicked his door open and returned fire, his movements sharp despite the blood running down his face. The attacker retreated, disappearing into the white van as it screeched away, leaving only smoke and bodies and the burning wreckage of the escort vehicle behind. Alfonso remained frozen over Anna for 3 long seconds, his breathing ragged, his back on fire. When he finally moved, he saw her eyes staring up at him wide, terrified, but alive. "You're okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. But as he looked at the burning sedan, at Marco's lifeless form slumped in the driver's seat, at the precision of the ambush, one truth crystallized with brutal clarity. The syndicate had known their exact route. Someone had told them where to strike, and Alfonso knew exactly who. The safe house was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where people knew better than to ask questions. Peeling wallpaper, water-stained ceiling, furniture that had seen better decades. It was the kind of place that existed in the margins, invisible to anyone who mattered. Enzo had swept it twice before allowing them inside, his face grim beneath the hastily applied bandage wrapped around his head. Anna sat curled on the sagging couch, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, her eyes following Alfonso's every movement, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she looked away. Alfonso stood shirtless in the cramped bathroom while Enzo worked on his back with steady hands, extracting the shrapnel piece by piece. Each fragment clinked into the metal bowl on the sink, small, jagged reminders of how close death had come. The pain was sharp and clean, easier to manage than the rage building in his chest. 7 pieces, Enzo muttered, threading the suture needle through Alfonso's torn skin. "You need a hospital." "What I need," Alfonso said through gritted teeth, "is to know who's still loyal." "After the bridge?" Enzo's hands paused. "Could be anyone, boss. Could be everyone." The burner phone on the sink buzzed. Alfonso grabbed it with his good hand, pressing it to his ear. "Talk." Carmine's voice came through thin and tense. "Boss, we've got a problem. Detective Reyes." "What about her?" Alfonso's jaw tightened. Vera Reyes was the one clean cop he'd cultivated over the years, a decorated detective with the anti-corruption unit who couldn't be bought, blackmailed, or broken. She was his insurance policy, the card he'd planned to play when the syndicate moved against him legally. "She's gone, suspended this morning. They're saying she took bribes, that they found $50,000 in cash in her apartment during a surprise inspection." Carmine's frustration bled through the phone. "It's a setup, obviously, but it doesn't matter," Alfonso finished coldly. "The commissioner signed off on it, personally. And District Attorney Thorne released a statement an hour ago calling it a betrayal of public trust. They're moving fast, boss. They're sealing every legitimate avenue we had." Alfonso stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Blood streaked across his shoulder. Exhaustion carved shadows beneath his eyes. Behind him, Enzo continued stitching, his movements methodical, practiced. "They're burning the bridges," Alfonso said quietly, "making sure we can't reach anyone inside the system." "What do we do?" Alfonso closed his eyes, feeling the sting of antiseptic and the deeper ache of understanding. The syndicate wasn't just powerful, they were systematic. They'd anticipated his moves before he'd made them, neutralized his assets before he could deploy them. Reyes was supposed to be his lifeline to legitimacy, his way of bringing the fight into the light where corruption couldn't hide. Now that door had been slammed shut and welded closed. "Boss?" Carmine's voice pulled him back. "Pull everyone back to the secondary locations. No one moves without my direct order. No one communicates outside secure channels." Alfonso's voice hardened. "And Carmine? Start looking at everyone who knew about the bridge route. Everyone. I want names, movements, phone records. Someone told them where we'd be." "You think it's internal?" "I know it's internal." He hung up before Carmine could respond. Enzo tied off the last suture, stepping back to examine his work. "That'll hold," Enzo said. "But you're still losing blood." Alfonso pulled on a clean shirt Enzo had brought, each movement deliberate despite the fire in his shoulder. Through the bathroom door, he could see Anna watching him, her small face pale in the dim light. The syndicate had stripped away his government contact. They'd turned the system against him. They'd proven they could strike anywhere, anytime, with precision that spoke of insider knowledge. Silvio's face flashed in his mind, the urgency, the desperation, the guilt. Alfonso stepped out of the bathroom, rolling his injured shoulder experimentally. The pain was manageable. Necessary, even. It kept him sharp. "We can't fight them through the system," he said to Enzo. "They own the system. Then how do we fight them?" Alfonso looked at Anna, at the micro-flash drive now hidden in his jacket pocket, at the evidence of a conspiracy so vast it had infected every institution meant to oppose it. "We burn them from the outside," he said, "and we start with the rat in our own house." Alfonso had been staring at the laptop screen for 3 hours, his wounded shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat. Anna slept fitfully on the couch. Enzo stood guard by the window, barely visible against the gray pre-dawn light. The flash drive's contents were spread across multiple windows, spreadsheets, encrypted communications, transaction histories, but something kept pulling his attention back to one particular entry buried in the offshore account ledgers. Account number 847CH9923. Transfer authorization. The old clock tower. 0300. Every other transaction had standard banking codes, but this one stood alone, cryptic, deliberately placed for someone who knew how to read between the lines. Not a time, not a location, a code. His fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing with Reyes's old cases. There, a corruption investigation at the Harbor Commission. The witness had mentioned the old clock tower on Pier 17. Pier 17 had been demolished months ago, but the coordinates would still work. 0300 wasn't a time, it was grid coordinates for a secure communication drop. Reyes had prepared for this day. The door's lock clicked. Enzo's hand went to his weapon. Alfonso closed the laptop and stood, his body positioning itself between Anna and the entrance. Silvio stepped through, his suit pristine, his face composed into concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Alfonso," Silvio said, "thank God you're safe. When I heard about the bridge—" "Close the door," Alfonso interrupted flatly. The door clicked shut. The room suddenly felt smaller. "We need to talk about next steps," Silvio continued. "The syndicate is mobilizing. I've been reaching out, trying to find a diplomatic solution." "How did they know?" Alfonso asked quietly. Silvio stopped. "What?" "The bridge. The exact route. The timing." Alfonso's eyes never left Silvio's face. "Only 4 people knew. Marco's dead. Enzo's standing right there. That leaves you and me." Silence except for Anna's soft breathing and distant sirens. Something shifted behind Silvio's eyes. Calculation. Resignation. "Boss," Enzo said softly, his gun drawn. Silvio froze. 12 years I trusted you," Alfonso said, his voice carrying weight that pressed against the walls. "And you sold me to them." "You don't understand," Silvio said, his composure cracking. "The syndicate, they're bigger than us. I was trying to save what we'd built before you dragged us into a war we couldn't win. You killed Marco. You put Anna in the crosshairs." Silvio's jaw tightened. "I did what was necessary. So will I." The windows exploded inward. Glass showered across the room as repelling ropes dropped from the roof, black-clad figures swinging through shattered frames with military precision. The front door splintered off its hinges. Flashbangs detonated, turning the world into white noise. The syndicate's assault team had arrived. Silvio had led them straight here. Alfonso dove for Anna as bullets tore through the furniture. Enzo returned fire, muzzle flashes strobing in the chaos. Silvio stood frozen, and Alfonso saw the exact moment he realized his mistake. The syndicate hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to eliminate everyone who knew about the ledger, including him. The assault team moved with surgical precision, their rifles trained on every living thing in the room. 6 men in tactical gear, faces hidden behind masks, advancing through the smoke and shattered glass like shadows given form. Enzo dropped one with a headshot, then dove behind the overturned couch as return fire chewed through the cheap drywall. Alfonso kept Anna pinned beneath him, his body, her only shield, his Beretta tracking targets through the chaos. Silvio stood in the center of the room, arms half raised, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, I'm the one who called you. I gave you the location. The lead operative didn't hesitate, 3-round center mass. Silvio staggered backward, his pristine suit blooming red, his eyes wide with the terrible understanding that comes too late. He'd been useful. Past tense. The syndicate didn't leave loose ends, and a traitor who'd betray once would betray again. "Silvio!" Alfonso's voice cut through the gunfire. Silvio collapsed against the wall, blood spreading across his chest, his breathing shallow and wet. But his hand was still moving, fingers closing around the pistol at his hip. The operatives advanced, stepping over broken furniture, their weapons sweeping methodically. One kicked Enzo's gun away. Another moved toward Anna, his rifle barrel dropping to aim at the small figure curled beneath Alfonso. The child too, the lead operative said flatly. Orders. Silvio's eyes met Alfonso's across the smoke-filled room. 12 years of partnership, 12 years of trust, 12 years ending in blood and betrayal. But in that final moment, something shifted in Silvio's expression. Regret, perhaps, or the last gasp of honor, in a man who'd sold it too cheaply. Alfonso, Silvio rasped, his voice barely audible over the ringing in everyone's ears. The pipes. Steam pressure. Alfonso's eyes flicked to the exposed utility line running along the wall. Industrial piping, corroded and ancient, hissing softly with pressure that had nowhere to go. His mind calculated angles, blast radius, escape routes. Silvio raised his pistol with trembling hands. Run, he whispered. Then he fired. The bullet punched through the pressurized pipe 6 feet from where the operative stood. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the pipe ruptured with the sound of the world tearing apart. Superheated steam exploded outward in a scalding white cloud, filling the room with blinding heat and noise. The operatives screamed, their formation breaking as visibility dropped to zero. Metal shrieked as pressure found weak points, turning the entire plumbing system into a bomb waiting to detonate section by section. Alfonso grabbed Anna and moved. Enzo was already at the wall, tearing away the panel that hid the maintenance access, a narrow crawl space that led to the building's ancient tunnel system. Anna went through first, then Alfonso, his injured shoulder screaming in protest as he squeezed into the darkness. Behind them, the second pipe burst. Then a third. The building's entire heating system was failing catastrophically, turning the safe house into a pressure cooker. Through the steam and chaos, Alfonso caught one last glimpse of Silvio still propped against the wall, his gun empty, his chest barely rising. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Silvio's lips moved, forming words Alfonso couldn't hear, but understood anyway. I'm sorry. Then Enzo pulled the panel shut, and they were running through the darkness. Anna's hand clutched tight in Alfonso's, the sound of explosions chasing them through the tunnels like the voice of judgment itself. Above them, the building groaned. The fourth pipe gave way. Fire alarms shrieked, and Silvio Contini, traitor and capo, died in the inferno of his own making, buying with his last breath the seconds his boss needed to escape. The tunnels beneath the city were older than memory, built when engineers still carved passages through bedrock with dynamite and desperation. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead. The air tasted of mold and chemicals, sharp enough to burn the lungs. Alfonso moved through the darkness with Anna's hand locked in his, Enzo somewhere behind them. They'd been running for 20 minutes, navigating by feel and dim emergency lighting that flickered more than it stayed lit. The tunnel forked ahead. Left led toward the river, right toward the industrial district. Boss, Enzo rasped. Company. Footsteps echoed behind them. The syndicate had found the maintenance access. Go right, Alfonso said, pushing Anna ahead. Stay with. The ceiling collapsed 20 feet in front of them. Concrete and rebar crashed down, cutting off the right passage entirely. Alfonso grabbed Anna and pulled her back as debris rained around them. Left! Enzo shouted. They ran toward the river tunnel, but water was pouring through cracks in the walls now. The floor became a stream, then a torrent, rising from ankles to knees in seconds. Anna stumbled. Alfonso caught her, lifting her against his chest. His wounded shoulder screamed. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber where multiple passages converged. Water rushed in from all sides, swirling around Alfonso's thighs. There, Enzo pointed to a ladder leading up to a maintenance hatch. A figure dropped from the overhead grating. Thomas Allen landed in the waist-deep water with a splash. He was soaked, wild-eyed, his clothes torn, but his hands were steady, gripping a rusted pipe wrench the size of a baseball bat. End of the line, Falcone, Thomas snarled. They promised me $1 million for the drive and the kid. Dead or alive. Alfonso set Anna on a dry concrete platform. Stay there. Enzo raised his gun, but Thomas swung the wrench in a vicious arc that caught Enzo's wrist with a crack. The gun flew into the dark water. Enzo collapsed with a howl. Thomas advanced on Alfonso. You should have minded your own business. She's a child, Alfonso said quietly, circling in the rising water. She's a payday. Thomas lunged. Alfonso sidestepped, but the water slowed him. The wrench grazed his ribs, sending lightning through his injured shoulder. He countered with a punch that caught Thomas in the jaw, but the bigger man barely flinched. Thomas grabbed Alfonso by the throat, driving him backward into the water. They went under together, hands scrabbling for purchase on slick skin. Alfonso's back hit submerged concrete, Thomas's weight pressed down, fingers squeezing his windpipe. Alfonso's lungs burned, his vision tunneled. Through the murky water above, He could see Anna's silhouette, small and terrified. His hand found something in the water. A piece of rebar, sharp and jagged. Alfonso drove it upward into Thomas's side. Thomas screamed, bubbles exploding from his mouth. His grip loosened. Alfonso surged upward, gasping, then grabbed Thomas by the hair and slammed his face into the concrete edge, once, twice, 3 times until the water turned red. Thomas went limp, floating face down. Alfonso stood there, chest heaving, blood streaming from his clothes. His shoulder was on fire. His ribs felt cracked, but Anna was safe. Above them, voices echoed. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "Detective Reyes," someone shouted. "Breach team, move in." Alfonso looked up to see uniformed officers rappelling into the chamber, badges gleaming. And leading them, her face set in grim determination, was Vera Reyes herself. The cavalry had finally arrived. Alfonso dragged himself onto the concrete platform beside Anna, every muscle in his body screaming. Blood from his reopened shoulder wound mixed with the filthy water dripping from his clothes. His ribs felt like shattered glass grinding with each breath. Anna threw her arms around him, her small body shaking. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," he lied, holding her close with his good arm. Enzo clutched his broken wrist against his chest, his face pale with pain. "Boss, we need to move. They'll have more coming." As if summoning them with his words, footsteps echoed from the tunnels above. Multiple sets, heavy boots on metal grating, the syndicate's reinforcements converging on their position like wolves circling wounded prey. Alfonso pushed himself to his feet, swaying. His Beretta was somewhere in the dark water, lost in the fight with Thomas. Enzo's gun was gone too. They had nothing left to fight with except exhausted bodies and depleted will. "The ladder," Alfonso said, his voice hoarse. "We climb, now." But Anna was staring past him, her eyes wide. The water's rising. She was right. The flood had accelerated, pouring through the damaged walls with increasing violence. The chamber was filling like a bowl. The ladder, their only escape route, was already half submerged. The footsteps grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above, searching. Alfonso lifted Anna onto his hip, despite the agony in his shoulder. If they were going to die down here, it wouldn't be because he'd stopped trying. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the underground engines. Multiple vehicles. The screech of tires on wet pavement. Above them, somewhere beyond the maintenance hatches and collapsed ceiling, car doors slammed. Someone was shouting orders in a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Gunfire erupted. Not aimed at Alfonso, but above him, in the tunnels where the syndicate's men had been closing in. The sharp crack of pistols mixed with the deeper bark of rifles, shouting. Chaos. A rope dropped through the overhead grating, splashing into the water beside the platform. "Falcone!" A woman's voice called down, strong and clear. "Grab the rope." Alfonso looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the flashlight beams. Dark hair pulled back tight, body armor over a simple jacket, a badge gleaming at her hip. Detective Vera Reyes. "How?" Alfonso started. "The old clock tower," Reyes called down. "I've been monitoring that drop site for 2 years, waiting for someone smart enough to find it. Now grab the damn rope before this whole structure comes down." Alfonso secured Anna to his chest with his belt, then grabbed the rope with his good hand. Reyes and 2 officers hauled them up through the grating, muscles straining. Enzo followed, his broken wrist cradled, his face set in grim determination. They emerged into the remains of an abandoned refinery, its rusted tanks and twisted piping silhouetted against the gray dawn sky. Unmarked cars surrounded the structure, their lights cutting through the morning mist. Officers in tactical gear were securing the perimeter, dragging the syndicate's operatives out of the tunnels in handcuffs. And there, being pulled from the flooded chamber by 2 uniformed officers, was Thomas Allen alive, barely conscious, his face a mask of blood and defeat. Reyes approached him with measured steps, pulling her handcuffs from her belt. "Thomas Allen, you're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy." She yanked his arms behind his back with more force than strictly necessary. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Alfonso lowered Anna to the ground, his legs finally giving out. He collapsed against the hood of an unmarked sedan, his vision swimming. Reyes knelt beside him, her expression hard but not unkind. "You look like hell, Falcone. You're supposed to be suspended," Alfonso managed. "I was." Then someone leaked the syndicate's entire financial ledger to the FBI field office with a note saying it came from a concerned citizen. Her eyes locked on his. "Funny timing. Got me reinstated within 12 hours. Turns out District Attorney Thorne and the Commissioner have bigger problems now than framing one detective. Alfonso almost smiled. Concerned citizen. Right. Around them, more officers emerged from the tunnels, escorting handcuffed syndicate operatives into waiting vehicles. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the refinery's ruins. Anna pressed against Alfonso's side, her hand finding his. "It's over," Reyes said quietly, watching the arrests. "The syndicate's done. We've got enough evidence to put half the city government in prison." Alfonso closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the past days finally settling onto his shoulders. Marco was dead. Silvio was dead. His organization was in shambles. But Anna was safe, and sometimes that had to be enough. 3 months later, the headlines had moved on to other scandals, other tragedies, but the damage to the Syndicate of the Rose was permanent and absolute. District Attorney Marcus Thorne sat in a federal holding cell awaiting trial on 47 counts of corruption and racketeering. Police Commissioner Strand had already pleaded guilty, in exchange for testimony against the others. 2 city council members had resigned. A federal judge had been disbarred. The carefully constructed empire had collapsed like a house of cards in a strong wind, and the whole city had watched it fall. Alfonso Falcone had watched too, but from a distance. The estate was gone, sold to pay lawyers and restitution to families of the men who died protecting him. The compound, the villa, the fleet of armored vehicles all liquidated. He'd kept one modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood where people didn't recognize his face, didn't know his name, didn't care about his past. He stood now on a tree-lined street in the suburbs, far from the towers and tunnels where he'd built his empire. The house before him was painted yellow with white trim, a swing set visible in the backyard, flowers blooming in neat rows along the walkway. Alfonso wore a simple button-down shirt, no designer label, no tailored fit, just cotton and buttons. His hands, once adorned with gold rings that signified power and status, were bare, except for the scars. The front door opened, and Anna stepped out. She was different. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, replaced by something lighter, not quite innocence, but hope. She wore jeans and a t-shirt with a cartoon character he didn't recognize. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like what she was, a 7-year-old girl who'd been given a second chance. "Alfonso," she called, breaking into a run across the lawn. He knelt to catch her, and she threw her arms around his neck without hesitation, without fear. "I drew you something," she said, pulling back to look at his face. "It's inside. Do you want to see?" "I'd love to." Anna's foster mother appeared in the doorway, a woman named Sarah, with kind eyes and a patient smile. She nodded to Alfonso, a silent acknowledgement of what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed. Anna tugged his hand, pulling him toward the house. "It's a picture of a big black car, like the one where we first met. Mrs. Sarah says I'm really good at drawing cars." Alfonso followed her up the walkway, letting himself be led. The weight he'd carried for 15 years, the violence, the power, the cold calculations that had defined every decision felt lighter now. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. Inside, the house smelled like cookies and fresh paint. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. A dog barked somewhere upstairs. Anna handed him a piece of construction paper. The SUV was rendered in crayon, blocky and enthusiastic, with a small stick figure underneath and a larger one standing beside it. "That's you," she said, pointing to the larger figure. "You saved me." Alfonso stared at the drawing, something tight forming in his chest. "No," he said quietly, kneeling to her level. "We saved each other." Anna smiled, and in that moment, Alfonso understood what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not power, not control, not the fear and respect of men who'd sell him out for the right price. Just this. One child safe, one life changed, one chance at redemption. He stayed for an hour, drinking tea with Sarah, watching Anna play, listening to her talk about school and friends, and all the ordinary miracles of a childhood reclaimed. When he left, Anna walked him to the door. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Every week," Alfonso promised. "If you want me to, I want you to." He walked back to his car, a modest sedan, nothing armored, nothing that drew attention. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Anna waving from the porch, backlit by the warm glow of the house. Alfonso Falcone had lost an empire, but he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found his way home. If Alfonso's choice to trade everything for one child's safety hit you right in the chest, then you need to subscribe right now. Because stories like this, where broken people find redemption in the darkest places, that's what this channel is built on. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, For the next person who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose differently. That power means nothing if you've got no one worth protecting. Drop a comment telling me, would you have made Alfonso's choice? Empire or innocence? I read every single one. And if you're still here, that next video on your screen, it's already waiting. Another story, another impossible choice, another chance to feel something real. Don't scroll past it like Thomas scrolled past Anna that night. See you in the next one.